Pearl Harbor, the attack that changed a generation forever.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
As you know, Pearl Harbor was bombed on a Sunday, so I had gone to church and was home, had walked home from church. And it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. My grandmother was fixing Sunday dinner for the two of us, and the neighbor next door came running over and said, "They've bombed Pearl Harbor." And my grandmother kind of went, "Oh." She had had 2 sons in World War I, actually 3 sons in World War I. So she knew that was war, but I, at my advanced age, didn't realize. I said, "Oh, well, what do we do now?" And the neighbor said, "Well, we're at war." When the neighbor came over and said they bombed Pearl Harbor, I think my first reaction was, "Where is Pearl Harbor?" And then it was, "Well, this is Hawaii." No, it's in Hawaii. Oh, my. Well, because, you know, the war was on in Europe big time, but the Japanese and Japan attacking us, that was something I certainly had never thought of.
We had just come home from church about 12:15, 12:30, and the phone was just ringing off the hook. My dad was considered a leader in the Japanese community, so a lot of people were calling him wondering, what's this we hear about Pearl Harbor, and how is that going to affect us?
Men and boys were sent off to war. At home, food and materials were suddenly scarce.
I remember the ration board more than anything.
Okay.
Well, the women wanted their sugar, and they wanted different things, and they would all go to the ration board and wait in line, and the government was good about supplying them, you know, everything they needed. But the ration thing was a big deal, more than the Victory Garden.
I remember we had coupons, and we were short of sugar, and had margarine that had to be colored, and but it wasn't hard. We certainly did not suffer.
You had to have a garden because you couldn't get vegetables, you couldn't get anything, you know. And my dad raised about everything in the garden. We raised corn, potatoes, turnips, and beans, and lima beans, and just tomatoes, just about everything we raised in the garden, you know. And you had to, because you couldn't get it at the store, you know. No.
The United States had not been attacked by a foreign country since the War of 1812. People were scared and suspicious of each other. Japanese Americans, American citizens, our neighbors, were declared enemies.
Oregon had Japanese, and of course they were all taken and sent away to these camps away from the coast, because this country didn't trust them in spite of the fact that they were American citizens and so on. We had several Japanese students in my high school, and all of a sudden they weren't there.
110,000 people were rounded up and sent to internment camps, often in desolate places. Secretary Norman Mineta was 10 years old when he was taken away.
Well, the day we were evacuating to go on the train to the camp, I was in my Cub Scout uniform. Had a baseball glove, and baseball bat. And as I got on the train, the MPs confiscated my bat, thinking it could be used as a lethal weapon. So I went crying to my dad saying, "The MPs took my bat." And he said, "Well, that's all right, we'll get you another one later on." The day we left for the internment camp, my oldest sister had gotten married and living in San Francisco. So that just meant that my dad, my mother, 2 older sisters, my older brother, and me, the youngest, went off to camp on May 29th, 1942.
Today it's difficult to imagine the war's effect. Boyfriends, husbands, brothers, uncles were enlisted or drafted for the war effort. Back home, loved ones had to carry on without them.
They were missed naturally, and it was a worry. Except for me, I never thought I'd lose my husband in the war. I never once had any fear. He was a flyer. I don't know where that comes in, but he was. He graduated from pilot school and then went to first pilot school and was first pilot on a B-24 heavy bomber.
Well, of course, we were all terrified of what could happen, but my brother was a naval ROTC in college, finished early, and went to officers training school at Columbia and became an ensign in the Navy, and went immediately to the Far East, to the worst of it, at there, Iwo Jima and Okinawa and those places.
All the boys in high school, during the war, were gung-ho to go. And it's so different than the Vietnam War and the Korean War, and there was such bitterness in the protest then. But during World War II, everybody was back of the war effort. They were very unified, and the boys would say, I'm going to be a Marine, and that's all they talked about. They were really anxiously awaiting to serve their country. It was amazing.
That war made a huge difference in my generation's life, those of us that were that age, because it changed. We were not as carefree. We were limited in what we could eat, in what we could buy. Among other things that were rationed were shoes, and let me tell you, for a high school girl who cannot go down every time she wants to and buy a pair of shoes, it was made a real difference.
The only way to keep in touch with soldiers fighting so far away was by mail, and those letters helped ease the loneliness.
The letters back then, they were so beautiful and so sincere and so descriptive of what they were doing for the war effort. And you could have let your minister or your grandmother read those letters because they were high quality.
Hello, honey, how are you? I'm back in England again under a little different condition, but getting along okay. I'm in a hospital and have a room all to myself. How's that? I was wounded on June 17th, machine gun fire. They took 9 bullets out of my hide. Must be kind of tough. It didn't hurt too much, never even lost consciousness, and it was still able to. I was still able to crawl a few hundred yards to get aid. I'm doing okay now, still hungry as ever. They've been feeding me plenty, but lying around all day and night kind of gets me down. This is the first chance I've had to write. My little right elbow took 3 slugs, but I can still scribble a little. I wrote Mom and Dad today, told them not to worry because there is no need to. I'm being well taken care of. Oh yes, I got my first airplane ride. They flew me out of France to England. Not bad either. Write soon and send it to this address.
The war was over in Europe. The atom bomb ended it in Japan. Celebrations broke out across the United States, with everyone looking forward to being reunited with loved ones.
Well, of course, very, very elated, very happy that everybody was coming back, but I knew we would win. We were on the right side, and I knew we would win, and it was no surprise to me. I was sorry it went on as long as it did, and boys lost their lives. And D-Day is something that really got me, and to this day, I could just cry because all those young boys landed on that beach, and so many of them died in an hour, and those young kids wanted to live.
I was working down at the courthouse at that time, so just before. Anyway, get in the bus and go into Washington and just walked up and down the streets and up and down the streets and back home again. It was really something.
Were there a lot of people out?
Oh, yes. The people just were coming out of their buildings.
With the war over and life returning to normal, some started looking for positive lessons.
I think it made me much more aware of Europe, certainly, and more interested in what was going on elsewhere in the world.
Well, it made me appreciate people, family, because of course one of my brother's best friend, who was a member of our church in Alexandria, was killed, and that was one of the worst things. And a boy to whom I had been very fond was one of the first German prisoners of war, and was a prisoner for 4 years, and it wrecked his life, and so that kind of thing affected me very much.
6 decades later, there was another attack on American soil. Again, the temptation was strong to judge people by looks and race.
On 9/11, I grounded all the planes. And then, as we were trying to figure out what's the security regimen by which we were going to let the airplanes go up, because Tuesday morning I had grounded all the planes. By Tuesday afternoon, the CEOs of the airlines are saying, "Hey, when are you going to let us fly again?" And I said, as soon as we come up with a regimen on how to do the security and letting the airplanes go back up. And one of the first things I had mentioned that our team had put together was no racial profiling. Because again, I was the product of one of the largest racial profiling events to occur in our country. What we experienced in 1942, all of a sudden on September 11th, was a real live drama for us. So again, if we don't learn from our history and from our past, if we make those same mistakes over again, then we really haven't learned very much. So I think what we've done in this great country is this kind of progression and evolution from one incident to another, and we've learned a great deal in our history.
The lessons of World War II are still valuable. The generation that lived through that war can help us remember their hardships and losses and how to best apply those lessons to build a more stable and safer world.